girls with 2 years of free schooling to prepare them for the infamously difficult entrance exam to the Indian Institutes of Technology, IIT, a group of elite engineering colleges whose graduates are coveted by companies such as Microsoft and Google. More than 1 million students apply to IIT each year, and less than 2% are accepted. But Dakshana has cracked the code. Over 12 years, 2,146 Dakshana scholars have won places at IIT, an acceptance rate of 62%. Pabrai views Dakshana, a Sanskrit word meaning gift, as a means of uplifting the most underprivileged segments of Indian society. Most Dakshana scholars come from rural families that survive on less than $2 a day. Many belong to lower castes, including untouchables who have suffered centuries of discrimination. Whenever Pabrai visits a Dakshana classroom, he breaks the ice by posing the same mathematical problem. Everyone who has solved it has subsequently won a place at IIT, so it's a useful way to gauge the talent in the room. The question is so hard that almost nobody gets it right, and he expects none of the Silvassa students to meet the challenge. Nonetheless, he writes the problem in chalk on the blackboard at the front of the classroom. N is a prime number greater than or equal to 5. Prove that n squared minus 1 is always divisible by 24. Then he leans back in a flimsy plastic chair while the girls attempt to divine the answer. What's the answer to Pabrai's question? This is a mystery that will forever elude me. I wonder what they make of this flamboyant, larger-than-life creature. A tall, burly, balding money man with a luxuriant mustache who's dressed in a Dakshana sweatshirt and pink jeans. After 10 minutes, Pabrai asks, "Is anyone close?" A 15-year-old girl named Alyssa says, "Sir, it's only a theory." Her tentativeness instills no confidence, but Pabrai invites her to the front of the classroom to show him her solution. She hands him a sheet of white paper and stands meekly before him, head bowed, awaiting judgment. Above her, a sign on the wall says, in charmingly garbled English, "So long as you have faith in you, nothing will be able to abstract you." "It's correct," says Pabrai. He shakes Alyssa's hand and asks her to explain her answer to the class. He later tells me that she solved the problem so elegantly that she could rank in the top 200 in the IIT exam. Pabrai tells her that she's a sure shot to get in. All you have to do is keep working hard. I subsequently learn that Alyssa is from the Ganjam district in the state of Odisha, one of India's poorest districts, and was born into a caste that the government calls other backward classes. In her previous school, she ranked first out of 80 students. Pabrai asks Alyssa to pose for a photograph with him. "You will forget about me," he jokes, "but then I can tell you, we have the picture." The girls laugh delightedly, but I find it hard not to cry. We have witnessed something magical. A child plucked from poverty has just proven that she has the mental firepower to propel herself and her family into prosperity. Given the environment in which she was raised and the odds against her, it's a kind of miracle. Later that morning, the students pepper Pabrai with questions. Finally, one plucks up the courage to ask what everyone must want to know. "Sir, how did you make so much money?" Pabrai laughs and says, "I compound money." Searching for a way to illustrate the concept, he says, "I have a hero. His name is Warren Buffett. Who here has heard of Warren Buffett?" Not a single hand goes up. The room is a sea of blank faces. So he tells the students about his 18-year-old daughter, Momachi, and how she earned $4,800 in a summer job after high school. Pabrai invested that money for her in a retirement account. He asks the students to calculate what would happen if this modest nest egg was to grow by 15% a year for the next 60 years. "It's doubling every 5 years. That's 12 doubles," he says. "Life is all about doubles." A minute later, The students have figured it out. In 6 decades, when Momachi is 78 years old, her $4,800 will be worth more than $21 million. There is an air of wonder in the room at the awesome power of this mathematical phenomenon. "Are you going to forget about compounding?" asks Pabrai, and 40 impoverished teenagers from rural India cry out in unison, "No, sir!" How to turn $1 million into $1 billion. Not so long ago, Monish Pabrai hadn't heard of Warren Buffett either. Raised in modest circumstances in India, he knew nothing about investing, Wall Street, or high finance. Born in 1964, he spent the first 10 years of his life in Bombay, now Mumbai, where his parents rented a tiny suburban apartment for $20 a month. They later moved to New Delhi and Dubai. The family was full of colorful characters. Pabrai's grandfather was a famous magician, Gojia Pasha, who toured the world posing as a mysterious Egyptian. As a boy, Pabrai appeared with him on stage. His role was to hold an egg. Pabrai's father, Om Pabrai, was an entrepreneur with an uncanny knack for founding companies that went bankrupt. Among his many ventures, he owned a jewelry factory, launched a radio station, and sold magic kits by mail. Like his son, he was an incorrigible optimist, but his businesses were fatally undercapitalized and over-leveraged. "I watched my parents losing everything multiple times," says Pabrai. "And when I say losing everything, I mean not having enough money to buy groceries tomorrow, not having money to pay the rent. I never want to go through that again. But what I saw is that it didn't bother them. In fact, the biggest lesson I learned from them is that I didn't see them get rattled by it. My father used to say, 'You could put me naked on a rock, and I will start a new business.'" As a child, Pabrai performed poorly at school, once placing 62nd in a class of 65, and he suffered from low self-esteem. Then, in 9th grade, he was given an IQ test that changed his life. I went to the guy who administered the test and said, "What does the result mean?" He said, "Your IQ is at least 180. You're just not applying yourself." It was like someone whipping a horse and it starts. That was a big turning point. People have to be told they have something in them. After high school, he headed to Clemson University in South Carolina. There, he discovered the stock market. He took an investing class and averaged 106% going into the final. The professor tried to convince him to switch his major from computer engineering to finance. "I completely ignored his advice," says Pabrai. "My perspective at that time was that all these fuckers in finance are dumbasses. They don't know shit. And this super easy class I'm taking in investing is 1/10 as hard as my engineering mechanics class. So why would I want to go into a field with these losers?" After college, Pabrai took a job at Tel Labs. Then in 1990, he launched a technology consulting company, TransTech, bankrolling it with $70,000 in credit card debt and $30,000 from his 401k. Most people couldn't stomach that level of risk, but he's always had a gambling streak. Indeed, we once spent an entire flight discussing his adventures at the blackjack tables in Las Vegas, where he doggedly applies an extremely boring system developed by a card counter with a PhD in finance. Pabrai's game plan is to make $1 million and get banned from the casinos. By 2020, he had turned $3,000 into $150,000 and been banned for life by one small, seedy casino. TransTech thrived, ultimately employing 160 people, and Pabrai set aside $1 million in savings by 1994. For the first time, he had a war chest to invest. That year, he bought One Up on Wall Street by Peter Lynch while killing time in Heathrow Airport. It was there that he first read about Buffett. He was astonished to learn that Berkshire Hathaway's chairman and CEO had racked up investment returns of 31% annually over 44 years, starting at the age of 20. Thanks to the magic of compounding, This meant that an investment of $1 in 1950 would have grown to $144,523 by 1994. Pabrai reached a logical conclusion. Buffett was not a dumbass. As a boy, Pabrai had heard a tale about an Indian who supposedly invented chess. He presented his game to the king, who offered him a reward. The game inventor requested 1 grain of rice for the first square of his chessboard, 2 grains for the second square, 4 for the third, and so on, all the way to the 64th square. The king, who was arithmetically challenged, granted the request. Pabrai, who is not arithmetically challenged, says the king owed 18 quintillion, 446 quadrillion, 744 trillion, 73 billion, 709 million, 551,615 grains of rice, now worth around $300 trillion. Remembering this story, Pabrai grasped instantly that Buffett had mastered the game of compounding. In 44 years, he had doubled his money 18 times and was already well on his way to becoming the richest man on earth. This set Pabrai thinking. What if he could figure out how Buffett picked stocks and could mimic his winning approach? Thus began what Pabrai describes as a 30-year game to turn his $1 million into $1 billion. The driver for me is not to get wealthy, he says. The driver is to win the game. It's exactly the same driver for Warren, which is to show through the results that I did the best and I am the best because I played the game by the rules, fair and square, and I won. Pabrai's approach to the challenge of becoming a billionaire holds important lessons for us all, not just as investors, but in every area of life. He didn't attempt to reinvent the wheel by, say, devising a new algorithm to exploit subtle pricing anomalies in the markets. Instead, he identified the most skillful player of this particular game, analyzed why he was so successful, then copied his approach with scrupulous attention to detail. Pabrai's term for this process is cloning. We could also call it modeling, mimicry, or replication, but the terminology doesn't matter. This is a technique for people who care more about winning than sounding respectable or highbrow. By cloning Buffett, and later his polymathic partner Charlie Munger, Pabrai has become one of the leading investors of our time. From 2000 to 2018, his flagship hedge fund returned a staggering 1,204% versus 159% for the S&P 500 index. If you had invested $100,000 with him when he started managing money in July 1999, it would have grown to $1,826,500 after fees and expenses by March 31st, 2018. This assumes you invested in his original partnership, Pabrai Investment Fund 1, at its inception in 1999 and held it till March 31st, 2018. Pabrai gave his initial investors a guarantee that he'd make them whole if they lost money. Realizing that this was onerously generous, he closed the fund and merged it with Pabrai Investment Fund 2 in 2002. It's worth noting that his returns have been wildly volatile. For example, he suffered a 15.1% loss in the first half of 2020, leaving his fund up 671.3% since inception, versus 218.4% for the S&P 500. One of his advantages is that these gut-wrenching swings don't bother him. Yet Pabrai's success, both as an investor and a philanthropist, is built entirely on smart ideas that he has borrowed from others. I'm a shameless copycat, he says. Everything in my life is cloned. I have no original ideas. Consciously, systematically, and with irrepressible delight, he has mined the minds of Buffett, Munger, and others, not only for investment wisdom, but for insights on how to manage his business, avoid mistakes, build his brand, give away money, approach relationships, structure his time, and construct a happy life. Pabrai's commitment to cloning raises an array of provocative questions. Is originality overrated? Instead of struggling to innovate, should most of us focus our energy on replicating what smarter and wiser people have already figured out? If cloning is such a powerful strategy for success, why don't more people use it? Are there dangers to cloning? And how can we benefit from it while also being true to ourselves? Over the last 7 years, I've spent a great deal of time with Pabrai. I've joined him on multiple trips to Omaha for Berkshire's annual meeting. I've interviewed him at his office in California. We've traveled together for 5 days in India, even sharing a bunk bed on an all-night train ride from Kota to Mumbai. And we've overeaten together everywhere, from his local Korean barbecue restaurant to a roadside shack in Jaipur. Along the way, I've come to appreciate the tremendous power of his method of reverse engineering, replicating, and often improving on other people's successful strategies. Pabrai, the most relentless cloner I've ever encountered, has taken the art of appropriation to such an extreme that, paradoxically, it seems oddly original. His thinking has had a profound impact on me. In fact, the overarching purpose of this book is to share what I would call ideas worth cloning. The laws of investing. When Pabrai discovers a subject that fascinates him, he attacks it with obsessive fervor. In Buffett's case, the available resources seemed limitless, including decades of letters to Berkshire's shareholders and seminal books such as Roger Lowenstein's Buffett, The Making of an American Capitalist. Pabrai devoured it all. He also began to make a pilgrimage each year to Omaha for Berkshire's annual meeting, showing up without fail for more than 20 years. Eventually, Pabrai would develop a personal relationship with Buffett. Through Buffett, he had also become friends with Munger, who invites him for meals at his home in Los Angeles and games of bridge at his club. But in those early days, Pabrai's knowledge came entirely from reading, and the more he read, the more convinced he became that Buffett, with Munger's help, had laid out the laws of investing, which are as fundamental as the laws of physics. Buffett's style of investing seemed so simple and so powerful that Pabrai considered it the only way to invest. But when he studied other money managers, he was perplexed to find that almost none lived by Buffett's laws. It was like meeting an entire set of physicists who don't believe in gravity. Whether you believe in gravity or not, it's fucking gonna pull you down. It was clear to Pabrai that most fund managers owned too many stocks, paid too much for them, and traded them too often. These mutual funds are sitting there with 1,000 positions or 200 positions. How can you find 200 companies that will all double? Then I look at what they own, and they own these things that are trading at 30 times earnings. I saw that they were all hosed. Pabrai had read a book by the management guru Tom Peters that told a cautionary tale of 2 self-service gas stations on opposite sides of the street. One prospers by providing high-quality service, such as cleaning windshields for free. The other does the bare minimum. What happens? Its customers inevitably drift to the better gas station. This error amazed Pabrai, since nothing could have been easier than simply to copy the superior strategy sitting in plain view. Humans have something weird in their DNA which prohibits them from adopting good ideas easily, says Pabrai. What I learned a long time back is keep observing the world inside and outside your industry, and when you see someone doing something smart, force yourself to adopt it. This sounds so obvious, even trite, but this one habit has played a decisive role in his success. So with the zeal of a true disciple, Pabrai committed to invest the way Warren said I should. Given that Buffett had averaged 31% a year, Pabrai naively assumed that it shouldn't be hard to average 26%. At that rate, his $1 million would double every 3 years and hit $1 billion in 30 years. As a reminder of this compounding target, his license plate reads COMLB26. Even if he missed by a mile, he expected to do fine, If, say, he averaged 16% a year, his $1 million would turn into $85.85 million in 30 years. Such is the glory of compounding. Of course, he had no MBA from a fancy school such as Wharton or Columbia, no qualification as a certified financial analyst, no experience on Wall Street. But Pabrai, who regards his entire life as a game, expected his rigorous application of Buffett's methodology to give him an edge over all of the fools who failed to follow the sage of Omaha. "I want to play games that I know I can win," says Pabrai. "So how do you win the game? You've got to play according to the rules. And the good news is, I'm playing against players who don't even fucking know the rules." As Pabrai saw it, Buffett's approach to stock picking grew out of 3 core concepts that he had learned from Benjamin Graham, the patron saint of value investing, who taught Buffett at Columbia and later hired him. First, whenever you buy a stock, you're purchasing a portion of an ongoing business with an underlying value, not just a piece of paper for speculators to trade. Second, Graham viewed the market as a voting machine, not a weighing machine, which means that stock prices frequently fail to reflect the true value of these businesses. As Graham wrote in The Intelligent Investor, it's useful to think of the market as a manic depressive who often lets his enthusiasm or his fears run away with him. Published in 1949, The Intelligent Investor has been hailed by Buffett as by far the best book on investing ever written. We'll meet its remarkable author at greater length in Chapter 4. Third, you should buy a stock only when it's selling for much less than your conservative estimate of its worth. The gap between a company's intrinsic value and its stock price provides what Graham called a margin of safety. But what does all of this mean in practical terms? Graham's insight that Mr. Market is prone to irrational mood swings has profound implications. For master investors such as Buffett and Munger, the essence of the game is to detach themselves from the madness and watch dispassionately until the bipolar market provides them with what Munger calls a mispriced gamble. There are no prizes for frenetic activity. Rather, investing is mostly a matter of waiting for these rare moments when the odds of making money vastly outweigh the odds of losing it. As Buffett has said, you don't have to swing at everything. You can wait for your pitch. The problem when you're a money manager is that your fans keep yelling, "Swing, you bum!" Sublimely indifferent to the cries of the crowd, Buffett can twiddle his thumbs for years. For example, he bought almost nothing from 1970 to 1972, when euphoric investors drove stocks to crazy valuations. Then, when the market crashed in 1973, he bought a major stake in the Washington Post Company, which he held for 4 decades. In his classic article, The Super Investors of Graham and Doddsville, Buffett wrote that the market valued the company at $80 million when you could have sold the assets to any one of 10 buyers for not less than $400 million. You don't try and buy businesses worth $83 million for $80 million. You leave yourself an enormous margin. When you build a bridge, you insist it can carry 30,000 pounds, but you only drive 10,000-pound trucks across it. And that same principle works in investing. In our hyperactive world, few people recognize the superiority of this slow and discerning strategy, which requires infrequent but decisive bursts of activity. Munger, a nonagerian whom Pabrai considers the brightest human he's ever met, embodies this approach. Munger once observed, "You have to be like a man standing with a spear next to a stream. Most of the time, he's doing nothing. When a fat, juicy salmon swims by, the man spears it. Then he goes back to doing nothing. It may be 6 months before the next salmon goes by." Few money managers function this way. Instead, says Pabrai, they place many bets, small bets, and frequent bets. The trouble is, there aren't enough compelling opportunities to justify all of this activity. So, Pabrai, like his 2 idols, prefers to wait for the most succulent salmon. During a conversation in his office in Irvine, he says, "The number one skill in investing is patience. Extreme patience." When the market crashed in 2008, he made 10 investments in 2 months. In more typical times, he bought just 2 stocks in 2011, 3 in 2012, and none in 2013. In 2018, Pabbrai's offshore hedge fund owned no US stocks at all because nothing seemed cheap enough. Just think about that for a moment. Out of roughly 3,700 companies listed on the major US exchanges, Pabbrai couldn't find a single irresistible bargain. Instead of settling for American stocks that seemed richly valued, he took his fishing spear to better stocked waters in India, China, and South Korea. As Munger likes to say, there are 2 rules of fishing. Rule number 1, fish where the fish are. Rule number 2, don't forget rule number 1. Then, in the spring of 2020, the US market crashed as the COVID-19 virus spread terror among investors. The retail industry was ravaged, with stores forced to close indefinitely and consumers required to stay home in lockdown mode. One company at the epicenter of uncertainty was Seritage Growth Properties, whose tenants included many retailers that could no longer afford to pay their rent. "The market hates all of this near-term noise and pain," says Pabbrai. He exploited the panic to buy a 13% stake in Seritage at exceptional prices, figuring that he'll ultimately make 10 times his money as fears recede and others recognize the value of its prime assets. Pabbrai also liked that Buffett, whose investment record in real estate is almost perfect, owned Seritage in his personal stock portfolio. "Not only are we cloning his approach," Pabbrai tells me, "we're directly cloning his position at 1/5 or 1/6 of the price he paid." Disclosure: cloning the cloner, I also invested in Seritage during the depths of the COVID crisis. Buffett, Munger, and Pabbrai are not alone in pursuing this strategy of extreme patience and extreme selectivity. Their elite cohort includes great investors such as Francis Chu, one of Canada's most prominent fund managers. When I first interviewed him in 2014, Chu had 30% of his assets in cash and hadn't made a significant stock purchase in years. "When there's hardly anything to buy, you have to be very careful," he told me. "You cannot force the issue. You just have to be patient, and the bargains will come to you." He warned, if you want to participate in the market all the time, then it's a mug's game, and you're going to lose. How long can he go without buying? "Oh, I can wait 10 years, even longer," Chu replied. In the meantime, he studies stocks that aren't cheap enough to buy, hits balls at a golf range, and reads 200 to 400 pages a day. One technique that he uses to distance himself emotionally from the day-to-day drama of the market is to think of himself in the third person instead of the first person. Like Chu, Pabbrai has constructed a lifestyle that supports this heroically inactive investment strategy. When I visited his office in Irvine, he was dressed in shorts, sneakers, and a short-sleeved shirt. He looked less like an adrenaline-fueled stock jockey than a vacationer contemplating a lazy stroll on the beach. Cloning Buffett, who once showed him the blank pages of his little black diary, Pabbrai keeps his calendar virtually empty so he can spend most of his time reading and studying companies. On a typical day at the office, he schedules a grand total of 0 meetings and 0 phone calls. One of his favorite quotes is from the philosopher Blaise Pascal. "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quiet in a room alone." One challenge, says Pabbrai, is that large motors aren't good at grinding away without resulting actions. He thinks Berkshire Hathaway's shareholders have profited immensely from Buffett's passion for playing online bridge, since this mental distraction counteracts the natural bias for action. Pabbrai plays online bridge too, and he burns off energy by biking and playing racquetball. When there's nothing to buy and no reason to sell, he can also direct more attention to his charitable foundation. He says it helps that his investment staff consists of a single person, him. The moment you have people on your team, they're going to want to act and